The early morning light crept through the small window of the Golden Spoon's employee bathroom as May stood before the mirror, tugging at her wrinkled apron. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon wafted in from the kitchen, mixing with the sharp smell of cleaning supplies. 3 years of waiting tables, and she still couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing pretend in this uniform. 10 minutes till opening, called out Uncle Pete, the head cook, his voice carrying through the thin walls. May took a deep breath, watching her reflection do the same. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of late-night studying and early morning shifts. This wasn't how she had pictured her life going, but bills didn't pay themselves. The restaurant was quiet now, but May knew better. Like the calm before a storm, this peace would soon give way to the morning rush. She could already picture it. The door chimes announcing the first wave of customers, the clinking of coffee cups, the scratch of pens on notepads, and the sizzle of eggs hitting the grill. As she stepped out into the dining room, her shoes stuck slightly to the freshly mopped floor. Sunlight streamed through the large front windows, catching dust particles in its beam and making them dance. Mai moved between the tables, straightening sugar packets and aligning silverware with the precision that 3 years of practice had drilled into her muscles. Morning, sunshine, called Ruby, another waitress who'd become like a big sister to May. She was already setting up the coffee station, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a messy bun. Ready for another day of adventure. Mai managed a small smile. As ready as I'll ever be. She began helping with the coffee prep, her hands moving automatically through the familiar routine. Fill the filters, measure the grounds, check the water levels. Every morning, the same dance. The first customers started trickling in right as the clock struck 6. The regulars came first. Mr. Chen from the newspaper stand who always ordered the same thing. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, no butter. Then came Mrs. Patel, the retired teacher who liked her coffee with exactly 3 creams, no sugar. May knew their orders by heart, could predict their movements like steps in a well-practiced routine. But something felt different today. Maybe it was the way her feet seemed to move more deliberately across the floor, or how the morning light hit everything at just the right angle. As she carried plates and dodged other servers, May caught glimpses of herself in the restaurant's windows. Her reflection showed someone in constant motion, floating between tables with an ease she'd never noticed before. The morning rush hit full force at 7. The door chime became a constant companion as business people rushed in for their pre-work breakfasts. Orders flew from May's notepad to the kitchen, where Uncle Pete orchestrated his own symphony of sizzling pans and clattering plates. Order up! The call came every few minutes, and May found herself moving faster, spinning between tables with increasing precision. It was chaos, but there was a rhythm to it. Like music without sound, like dance steps without music. A fresh pot of coffee in one hand, plates balanced along her arm. Mai navigated the maze of tables and customers. She could feel sweat starting to form at her temples, but her movements remained smooth, controlled. Each step had purpose, each turn was calculated. "How do you make it look so easy?" asked a new waitress, watching May with wide eyes as she effortlessly handled the morning chaos. Mai paused, realizing she'd never thought about it before. The answer surprised her as it left her lips. "I guess I just found my rhythm." As the morning rush began to fade, Mai took a moment to catch her breath by the coffee station. Her feet ached, her notepad was smudged with pen marks and syrup stains, but something had shifted in her understanding of this daily routine. Maybe this wasn't just killing time until something better came along. Maybe there was something more to these morning rhythms than she'd realized. The lunch rush was in full swing at the Golden Spoon when May noticed someone watching her. Between delivering plates of steaming pasta and refilling water glasses, she caught glimpses of an elderly woman sitting alone by the window. The woman's eyes followed May's movements with unusual interest, making her wonder if something was wrong with her service. The woman had ordered a simple cup of tea and soup, but she'd been there for almost an hour. Her perfectly straight posture and the graceful way she held her teacup hinted at years of discipline. May found herself standing a bit taller whenever she passed her table. "Excuse me," the woman called out as May whisked past with a tray of dirty dishes. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you ever studied dance?" May had nearly dropped her tray. Memories flooded back, the smell of wooden floors, mirror-lined walls, the sound of piano music flowing through old speakers. She carefully set down her load and turned to face the woman. "I used to. A long time ago." "How did you know?" The woman's eyes sparkled. "I've taught ballet for 40 years. You can't fool these old eyes. The way you move between these tables, it's not just walking. You're dancing, whether you realize it or not." Heat rose to May's cheeks as other memories surfaced. Her mother scraping together money for lessons, the second-hand ballet shoes she'd worn until they fell apart, the day she decided to be practical and give it all up. "I'm just trying not to crash into anyone," May said with a nervous laugh, but the woman shook her head. "Watch yourself sometime. The way you carry those plates. Perfect balance. How you spin to avoid collisions. Spotting, just like in pirouettes. The rhythm you found in chaos. That's dance, dear." Before Mai could respond, Uncle Pete's voice boomed from the kitchen. "Order up." She excused herself, but the woman's words followed her through the rest of her shift. That afternoon, May began to notice things she'd never paid attention to before. How she automatically counted steps between tables. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, a natural waltz. The way she used the counter's edge for balance, just like a ballet bear. Even her habit of keeping her core tight while carrying heavy trays came from years of dance training she thought she'd forgotten. During a quiet moment, Ruby caught her practicing what might have been a playa while waiting for coffee to brew. "Someone's feeling graceful today," she teased. May smiled, remembering how she used to dream of spotlights and stages. "Did you ever have something you loved so much it scared you?" Ruby wiped her hands on her apron, thinking. "My singing. Used to do it all the time, then convinced myself I wasn't good enough. Now I only sing in the shower." She paused. Funny how we talk ourselves out of the things that make us happy. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, creating long shadows on the floor. May found herself following them like stage marks, her feet remembering positions she hadn't thought about in years. Each time she delivered plates or cleared a table, she paid attention to her movements. The woman was right. She had been dancing all along. When the dinner crowd started to arrive, May noticed her body moving differently. Not dramatically, but with more intention. She let herself feel the music playing softly through the restaurant speakers. Her steps fell naturally into rhythm with it. Even the chaos of the dinner rush became a kind of choreography. As she collected menus from a departing family, May caught her reflection in the window. For a moment, she didn't see a tired waitress in a wrinkled uniform. She saw a dancer who had never really stopped dancing. The thought made her smile, really smile, for the first time in what felt like years. The ballet teacher's table was empty now, but she'd left something besides her tip. A small business card for a dance studio across town. On the back, in elegant handwriting, "It's never too late to return to what you love." Mai slipped the card into her apron pocket. The weight of it felt like possibility. The dinner shift had been brutal from the start. A bust had broken down nearby, flooding the Golden Spoon with hungry, frustrated passengers. The kitchen printer spat out orders faster than Uncle Pete could handle them, and the rain outside drove even more people through their doors seeking warm food and shelter. Mai had been running nonstop for hours, the business card from the ballet teacher burning a hole in her apron pocket. Every time she reached for her order pad, her fingers brushed against it, like a tiny reminder of a different life. Table 12 still waiting for their appetizers, Ruby called out as she rushed past with a pot of coffee. "And 23 needs their check." May nodded, trying to keep her mental map of tables straight. The rain drummed against the windows, providing an irregular beat to her movements. She'd been doing fine, maintaining her usual rhythm, until she heard the song. It came on through the kitchen radio, an old classical piece she used to practice to, back when dance was her whole world. Her body remembered it before her mind did, and for a split second, she lost focus. That's when it happened. The tray was too heavy, loaded with 4 entrees for a family of hungry tourists. As Mai rounded the corner by the drink station, her foot caught the edge of a mat that had bunched up from all the rain tracked in. She felt herself falling before it happened, watched in slow motion as the plates slid forward. The crash brought the entire restaurant to a sudden silence. Shattered plates and scattered food created a terrible artwork on the floor. May stood frozen, feeling dozens of eyes on her. Then came the voice. "Are you kidding me? Do you know how long we've been waiting?" A man from table 12 stood up, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous. I want to speak to a manager, now." May's hands shook as she knelt to clean up the mess. Ruby appeared with a broom and dustpan, quietly shooing Mai away. "Go take a minute," she whispered. "I've got this." In the break room, May sank onto a rickety chair, her legs trembling. The classical music still played faintly through the walls, mocking her. She pulled out the ballet teacher's card, its corners now soft from being handled so much. "You okay, kid?" Uncle Pete's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, his usual energetic demeanor softened with concern. "Ruby told me what happened." "I'm fine," May said automatically, but her voice cracked. I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Uncle Pete pulled up another chair, the metal legs scraping against the floor. "You know, I wanted to be a musician once. Played guitar in a band, had real dreams about it." He smiled at the memory. "Life had other plans, but you know what? I still play. Every night after closing. Music's still part of who I am, just not the way I expected." Mai looked down at the card in her hands. There was this song playing. I used to dance to it. For a moment, I forgot where I was, and then... She gestured helplessly. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Uncle Pete said quietly. "Forgetting where you are. Sometimes we need to get lost to find our way back." The kitchen radio had switched to jazz now, smooth and gentle. May's feet began to move of their own accord, tapping out a rhythm against the break room floor. Uncle Pete noticed but said nothing, just hummed along with the music. "You know," he said finally, "there's always someone who will tell you to be practical. To give up the things that make your heart beat faster. But if you ask me, the most practical thing you can do is be true to yourself." Mai wiped her eyes, surprised to find them wet. The card in her hands didn't feel like just a piece of paper anymore. It felt like permission. Permission to want something more, something different. "The dinner rush isn't over," she said, standing up. "No," Uncle Pete agreed, "but maybe that's not the only rush worth chasing." When Mai returned to the dining room, the mess had been cleaned up. Ruby had smoothed things over with the angry customer, and the rhythm of the restaurant had returned to normal. But something had shifted inside May. Each step she took felt like a decision. Each movement was a small act of rebellion against the person she'd been pretending to be. The rain continued to fall outside, but now its pattern sounded less like chaos and more like music. Music she could dance to, if she dared. The morning light hadn't yet touched the windows of the Golden Spoon when May unlocked the front door. She'd asked Uncle Pete if she could come in early, claiming she wanted to deep clean some tables. He'd given her a knowing look and handed over the spare key without question. The dining room looked different in the pre-dawn darkness. Chairs sat upside down on tables like sleeping dancers, their legs pointing toward the ceiling. May set her small phone speaker on the counter and pressed play. The gentle notes of piano music filled the empty space. Her old ballet shoes, dug out from the back of her closet last night, felt stiff and foreign on her feet. The leather crackled as she took her first position, holding onto a table edge like a ballet bear. Her reflection in the dark windows looked ghostly, uncertain. Start small, she whispered to herself, remembering her old teacher's words. She began with simple plies, bending her knees while keeping her back straight. Her muscles protested. Waiting tables kept her fit, but this was different. This was awakening something that had been dormant for too long. The first rays of sunlight began to creep through the windows as Mai moved away from the table, trying basic steps she thought she'd forgotten. Each movement came back slowly, like remembering the words to a song you haven't heard in years. Her body remembered more than her mind did. Lost in the music, she didn't notice Uncle Pete arrive until he spoke. "Well, this is a different kind of morning prep." Mai stumbled, embarrassment flooding her cheeks. "I was just." "Don't stop on my account," he said, heading toward the kitchen. "I'll put on some coffee. And May, you might want to try that spin again. You've got plenty of room without the tables in your way." She watched him disappear into the kitchen, then heard the familiar sounds of morning prep beginning. The click of the grill turning on, the clatter of pans. The coffee maker gurgled to life, its aroma mixing with the dusty smell of the empty restaurant. Taking a deep breath, May returned to her practice. This time, she tried the spin, a simple pirouette. Her first attempt was wobbly, the second a bit better. By the fifth try, her body had remembered how to spot, how to hold her core tight, how to land softly. "You've got an audience," Uncle Pete called out. May turned to see the morning prep cook, Lai, watching through the kitchen window while chopping vegetables. Instead of turning away, Lai gave her a thumbs up and continued chopping in rhythm with May's music. Over the next hour, May moved through the empty restaurant, relearning her own capabilities. She discovered that the space between tables was perfect for small jumps. The long aisle by the window worked well for traveling steps. Even the wine storage area, with its sturdy racks, could serve as a bear for stretching. When Ruby arrived for her morning shift, she found Mai practicing a series of chana turns down the length of the restaurant. "So that's why you wanted to come in early," she said, smiling. "You know, I used to watch those dance competition shows all the time. Never seen anyone practice in a restaurant before, though." "Is it weird?" Mai asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Honey, I've seen customers try to pay with Monopoly money and a guy propose with a ring hidden in his dentures. This," Ruby gestured at May's ballet shoes. "This is beautiful." The morning sun now filled the restaurant completely, and May knew she needed to change into her work shoes and help set up for opening. But as she untied her ballet shoes, she felt different. Her muscles ached pleasantly, and her reflection in the window showed someone more alive than the person who'd walked in an hour ago. "Same time tomorrow?" Uncle Pete asked as she passed the kitchen, now bustling with morning preparations. May nodded, hugging her ballet shoes to her chest. "Same time tomorrow." As she changed into her work uniform, May realized that the Golden Spoon had become more than just her workplace. In the quiet hours before opening, it had become her studio, her practice space, her path back to herself. The tables and chairs were no longer obstacles. They were partners in a dance she was just beginning to remember. 2 weeks into her morning practice routine, May noticed something different about her work shifts. The way she moved through the restaurant had changed. What used to be just walking now felt like part of a larger performance. One where plates of steaming food and pitchers of water were props in an ongoing dance. "There's something about you lately," said a regular customer, an elderly man who came in every Tuesday for the meatloaf special. "You're practically floating around here." May smiled as she refilled his coffee cup. Her muscles were sore from that morning's practice, but it was a good kind of sore. The kind that reminded her she was working towards something. The evening dinner service was in full swing, and the kitchen radio played an upbeat song. Mai found herself timing her movements to the music. 3 steps to table 4, a quick turn to avoid the busboy, a smooth pivot to grab fresh rolls from the warming drawer. "Order up." Uncle Pete's voice called out its familiar rhythm. May grabbed the plates, balancing them along her arms just as she'd learned to balance in her morning practices. Her core stayed tight, her steps measured and precise. Ruby watched her from the coffee station, shaking her head in amazement. "You know, when you first started coming in early to practice, I thought you were crazy. But look at you now. You're turning this whole place into a stage." It was true. The restaurant had become more than just a workplace. Every corner held a memory of a morning practice session. The spot by the window where she'd finally landed a perfect pirouette. The quiet corner where she stretched while watching the sunrise. The long aisle where she practiced her jumps before the tables were set. During a quiet moment, Mai pulled out her phone to check the time and saw a new message. It was from the dance studio, the one whose card the ballet teacher had left. They were offering evening classes, beginner to advanced. Her heart beat faster as she read the schedule. "You should go," said Lai, who'd come out from the kitchen and noticed her staring at her phone. "I've seen you practice every morning. You've got the fire back in your eyes." "But the evening classes, they're during dinner service. I can't just." "We can cover for you," Ruby interrupted, having overheard. "2 nights a week won't kill us. Right, Lee?" Lai nodded enthusiastically. "Uncle Pete already said it's okay. We've been talking about it." Mai looked between them, touched by their support, but still uncertain. "What if I'm not good enough? It's been so long." "Not good enough?" Ruby laughed. "Honey, I just watched you carry 4 plates of spaghetti while doing what looked like ballet. If that's not talent, I don't know what is." The dinner rush picked up again, and May tucked her phone away. As she moved through the restaurant, she began to see how her 2 worlds had already merged without her realizing it. The way she remembered complex orders was just like remembering dance sequences. Her careful footwork between tables mimicked the precise steps she practiced each morning. Even the most chaotic moments had a kind of choreography to them now. When 3 tables needed attention at once, she moved between them like she was performing a complicated dance combination. Each motion flowed into the next, efficient but graceful. Near closing time, the ballet teacher returned. She sat at her usual window table, ordered her usual tea, and watched May work with knowing eyes. This time, when Mai approached her table, she held her head high. "I've been practicing," May said, pouring the tea with a flourish that could have been a dance move. The teacher smiled. "I can tell. You're not just moving through space anymore. You're owning it. Have you thought about those classes?" Mai pulled out her phone, showing the studio schedule she'd been staring at all day. I think it's time. You know," the teacher said, stirring her tea, "some of the best dancers I've known came to it later in life. They brought something special to their dancing. Real-world experience, genuine emotion, true understanding of how movement works in everyday life." Maya looked around the restaurant, at the place that had unexpectedly become her first stage. The tables that had been her ballad bars, the aisles that had been her practice space, the coworkers who had become her first audience. "I never really stopped dancing," she realized aloud. "I just didn't know I was still doing it." The teacher nodded. "Sometimes the longest journey is the one from where you are to where you've been all along." The envelope sat unopened next to the coffee maker in May's tiny apartment. She'd received it yesterday after her evening dance class, her 3rd week of attending the studio. The director had handed it to her with a smile that made May's heart race. Now, in the pre-dawn darkness before her morning restaurant shift, she finally gathered the courage to open it. Previous content continues as above. The late afternoon sun streamed through the Golden Spoon's windows, casting long shadows across the recently mopped floor. May stood in the middle of the dining room, her work uniform replaced by a simple black leotard and dance skirt. It was Sunday, after closing time, and she had something special planned. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Uncle Pete, who was arranging chairs in a semicircle with Ruby and Lai's help. "Kid, we've been waiting weeks to see what you can really do," he replied, setting down the last chair. "Ever since you got into that community dance company." The past month had been a whirlwind. After her successful audition, Mai had joined the dance company's evening performances while keeping her morning and afternoon shifts at the restaurant. Her worlds had merged in unexpected ways. Regular customers now asked about her performances, and her fellow dancers sometimes came to eat during her shifts, filling the corner tables with laughter and shop talk. "The whole crew's coming," Ruby announced, checking her phone. Even the weekend staff wanted to see this. Mai took a deep breath, looking around at the space that had become so much more than just a restaurant. Every corner held memories. The spot where she'd first practiced her turns, the table where the ballet teacher had noticed her, the break room where she'd made her decision to audition. As her coworkers settled into their seats, May connected her phone to the restaurant's speakers. She'd chosen music that felt right for this moment. Not classical ballet, but something that mixed traditional and modern sounds, just like her own journey had done. "Before I start," May said, her voice shaking slightly, "I'd want to thank you all. This place, these floors, these tables, they were my first dance studio when I found my way back to dancing. And you all were my first audience, even if you didn't know it at the time." The music began softly. Mai had choreographed this piece specifically for the restaurant space, incorporating movements born from her years of waiting tables. A turn that echoed how she used to dodge through the dinner rush. Arm movements inspired by carrying trays of plates. Steps that flowed between tables just as she'd done countless times before. As she danced, she could hear small gasps and murmurs of appreciation from her coworkers. Even Lai, who had watched her morning practices for months, seemed amazed by how she transformed their familiar space into something magical. The choreography took her past the window where it had all started. Past the coffee station where she practiced her balance. Through the spaces between tables that had become her practice floor. Each movement told part of her story, the muscle memory of both serving and dancing flowing together in perfect harmony. When the music reached its final notes, Mai ended in the center of the room, right where she'd started her very first morning practice. For a moment, complete silence filled the restaurant. Then came the applause, not just clapping, but cheering and whistling that made her cheeks flush with joy. "That was beautiful," Ruby said, wiping tears from her eyes. "You made waiting tables look like art." "Because it is," came a familiar voice. The ballet teacher stood in the doorway. Uncle Pete had invited her specially for this performance. Every movement can be dance if it's done with intention and heart. As her coworkers gathered around with hugs and congratulations, May caught her reflection in the window. She saw neither a waitress nor a dancer, but something uniquely her own, someone who had found a way to make every movement matter, whether under stage lights or fluorescent ones. "So," Uncle Pete said, bringing out a cake he'd been hiding in the kitchen, "when's your next performance?" "We're thinking of making the Golden Spoons schedule work around your dance shows." Mai laughed, looking around at the faces that had become her second family. "You know what? I think I finally figured out the perfect rhythm. Morning practices here, afternoon shifts, evening performances. A different kind of dance, but still all me." As they shared cake and stories, the setting sun painted the restaurant in warm colors. Music still played softly through the speakers, and May noticed several of her coworkers swaying to it unconsciously. She smiled, realizing that maybe she wasn't the only one discovering the dancer within. The restaurant had changed her, and she had changed too. But the most beautiful change was realizing that she didn't have to choose between her worlds. Every step, every turn, every moment was part of the same dance, her dance, finally performed with her whole heart.